welcome to the American Teacher Act briefing. We're so pleased that all of you came today. We're here today to advocate for our teachers, our educators, our saving grace that rescues families and especially rescues our children every day. We want our teachers to be paid a livable wage, a wage that is fair, a wage that is commensurate with today's economy. I'd like to thank the Teacher Salary Project for co-hosting this briefing. They've been an invaluable partner during this process, and it has been a pleasure to work with all of our leading education advocacy organizations. I also want to thank today's panelists, and especially former Secretary of Education, the brilliant scholar, Arnie Duncan. Thank you, Arnie, for lending your voice to the fight to raise teacher salaries and address the nationwide teacher shortage crisis. Teachers are the bedrock of our nation. As a former teacher, school principal, district administrator, founder of the 5,000 Role Models of Excellence and in-school mentoring program, a school board member and state legislator, I know firsthand the vital role that teachers play in the development of children everywhere, every day. From the first bell to the last bell, they act as caregivers, counselors, role models, advocates, and cheerleaders, helping children achieve their greatest potential. For over 7 hours, sometimes over 8 hours a day, we entrust them with feeding, educating, nurturing, and caring for our children. Have we as a nation ever stopped to ponder what would we do without teachers? Better still, what would our children do without teachers? Teachers are invaluable. And as our country came to a standstill during the novel COVID-19 global pandemic, teachers stood ready to adapt and support our children mentally and emotionally through one of the most challenging periods in our history. They never missed a step. Not every teacher in the nation was relegated to teaching online. Many had to travel house to house to make sure that our students who did not have access to technology were learning and safe, depending on the limitations of their school district and zip code. I talked to many of them during the pandemic, but they kept students learning. And as all of us know, they kept parents sane. Parents would tell me over and over that they never realized how difficult it was to be a teacher as they experienced the lockdown alongside their children. They'd ask, how do they do it, Ms. Wilson? How do they do it every day? I have 3 children home with me every day. These teachers have 30. Some of them have 120 if they're in high school. So hats off to teachers. I applaud them every day. It was during this time that the world finally saw what we've known for years. Teachers are heroes, and they deserve a livable, competitive salary that accurately reflect the importance of their role in society. So I introduced the American Teacher Act because today, over 9,000 school districts in America pay teachers less than $40,000 a year, and another 222 school districts pay them under $30,000. This is not enough to even halfway cover the cost of living. We should be embarrassed that 1 in 5 teachers in this country are forced to work a second job, some in retail, some drive Ubers, and others in the service industry to make ends meet. I was in the mall with my grandson the other day, and a retail worker tweeted him. She said, responded, "Hello, Miss Sanchez." And I asked him, I said, "How do you know Miss Sanchez?" And he said, "That's my English teacher. Miss Sanchez was selling me shoes after school." This is among the leading reasons teachers are fleeing the profession by the thousands. The American Teacher Act addresses this teacher shortage by incentivizing states across the country to establish a minimum teacher salary of no less than $60,000. Minimum. We're also advocating for a national campaign to renew the awareness of teaching as an essential and economically viable profession. As of 2023, teachers earn 23.5% less than similar educated professionals in our workforce. Yet, all teachers must have a 4-year degree, pass a high-stakes state test, federal examinations, just to earn teaching accreditation. The teacher shortage is among the most pressing threats to education access today, and we must address it. Our classrooms are at stake. Our children are at stake, and the future of our country is at stake. Every day, we see stories surfacing of schools shortening their weeks, canceling courses, increasing student-teacher ratios, and placing underprepared or temporary substitute staff in core instructional roles. This disruption in learning is taking a toll on teacher morale and harms student achievement. So the American Teacher Act will allow schools to recruit capable and qualified teachers, especially black men. Black and brown male teachers need to find their places in our elementary and middle schools. This bill aims to address the diversity gap in the teaching profession. My son Paul was a summa cum laude graduate of his university and majored in elementary education. He was asked every day by his fellow students who were all female and his professors who were all female, "Why are you majoring in elementary education, Ronnie? You were so smart. You should be a lawyer. You could be poor, and you could be making 6 figures upon graduation." How sad. Establishing a living wage is the only way we can recruit, retain qualified educators, and the American Teacher Act helps us get there. With your support, all of you in this room and all of you listening, we're elevating this conversation to the national level and showing our appreciation for teachers through action. Teachers deserve not just our gratitude, but a competitive living wage. Thank you to all of you for standing with teachers, and thank you for all that you do on behalf of our children. If you can read this, thank a teacher.
As you know, you're in on our secret. We're totally out of order. So Dave is now not going to read a beautiful introduction he wrote about Wilson, but maybe if you stay after, he'll read it to you. So we're going to get quickly to the panel. I know our time is super precious. I'm just going to do my quick introduction, and then we'll introduce you to our esteemed guests. I was a classroom teacher for many years. I taught in 3 schools, and the teachers I worked with were truly inspiring, resourceful. They were loving, charismatic, enthusiastic, ethical, kind, and brilliant. I was in awe of my colleagues, and as a young professional, I continue to be in awe of teachers today. My first boss, Helen Jacobson, is here. She hired me 27 years ago, and she can agree that the teachers that we worked together, they were amazing. As a teacher myself, I felt that my work was noble, impactful, fulfilling. I actually wanted other people to want my job. Sadly, I also felt the condescension from the outside world, I would often think, wow, that person doesn't think my job is sophisticated, nor do they think it's consequential to be responsible for shaping the minds of the next generation. In 2003, fast forward, while Dave and I were running Age of 6 Valencia nonprofit, Dave Eggers and I were running Age of 6 Valencia nonprofit writing and tutoring center, we had a conversation where we both agreed that teachers are the backbone of our democracy and that their pay was absurdly low given their value to our communities. We set out to try and do something about it. We co-authored a book, and we made a feature film called American Teacher. Those are my props. We produced film shorts, all documenting the untenable position we had put teachers in, bringing lessons in love to their classrooms while housekeeping, giving blood, doing other surprising jobs to make ends meet. We grew more dismayed as we understood the cost of teacher turnover, so we approached legislators and asked for their help. 19 years, we've tried to make it clear it's time to pay teachers professionally so that they can get to work of educating young people. This goal is more important today than ever. 2/3 of districts are experiencing teacher shortages, and in 42 states, a teacher who has a family of 4 is eligible for public benefits programs. So right now, in a perfect world, Dave would then be introducing the honorable and wonderful warrior, Wilson. We're going to skip that part and move right on to the panel. Thank you for your sense of humor and your patience with our changes. She needs to go vote. Dr. Ellen Sherritt is an economist featured on NBC, MSN, Education Week, and more. She was previously Vice President of Policy and Research at the National Board of Professional Teaching Standards and the Deputy Director of the Center for Great Teachers and Leaders. She is a national leader on teacher compensation and the board president of the Teacher Salary Project. Ellen.
So first, for those of you standing in the back, there are a few seats up at the front if you want to come this way. Thank you so much for that introduction, Nineveh, and thank you to Representative Wilson and her team and to all of you for being here for this vital conversation. We know that 75% of voters across the aisle and about 50% of business leaders want to see teacher salaries increase. And it's in the hands of all of us here in this room and watching to make that happen. Now, I've been studying and advocating and engaging with stakeholders on this topic of teacher shortages and teacher salaries for about 20 years, including a deep dive dissertation that looked at these trends for the decades and centuries before that. And I have a few observations I'd like to share. First, this is a historic bill at a historic time for the teaching profession. Teachers have always been paid woefully below other professionals and what they deserve. And that's especially being a female-dominated profession, and that's never been okay. But right now, when we look at the longitudinal data, it's historic highs and historic lows across multiple measures. Representative Wilson mentioned the pay gap for teachers. That's the worst that it ever has been. Teacher morale also is the worst it ever has been. MetLife and Merrimack College conduct a survey of the teacher profession every year, and they shocked the nation in 2012 when they found that teacher morale had dropped from about 55% of teachers being very satisfied with the profession to just 39%. And everyone said, what are we going to do? We didn't think it could possibly get worse than that. Today, it's down to 12% of teachers being very satisfied with the profession. PDK's data also had hit a historic high a couple of years ago, which made a big splash in media when for the first time ever, more than half of parents were saying that they didn't want their children to become teachers. It was 54%. Today, that's risen to a historic high of 62%. And parents give low salaries as the #1 reason why they do not want their children to become teachers. So it's a historic bill at a historic time, not to mention the historic learning loss and mental health challenges that children as well as teachers are dealing with because of COVID. And at this historic time, we need a historic solution to significantly increase teacher salaries, such as what we're proposing. So to be very clear, what we're proposing is twofold. First, we're asking everybody, Congresspeople, leaders of nonprofits, business leaders, civic leaders, celebrities, everyone to come together around this idea that our teachers should be able to earn competitive and livable salaries. And then second, with the Teacher Salary Act, we're asking states and districts and incentivizing them through this bill to have the conversations that they need to be having about whether they are spending their resources in the ways that we know matter most for teachers. So the research is clear that teachers are the most important factor affecting student success. And we know from the research at the world's top performing school systems that paying teachers is a necessary first condition for recruiting and retaining and professionalizing teaching as a career. All of the world's best performing school systems have managed to do this. We can do it too, and we hope you'll join us on this journey. I will next pass it over to our next expert, Rodney Robinson, the 2019 National Teacher of the Year.
Thank you. Thank you. So National Teacher of the Year is this weird award because they're like, you're a good teacher, so now we're going to take you out of the classroom and send you around the country like Miss America. So it's just a really weird situation to be in. But being and traveling so much, traveling 4 or 5 days a week, 20 days a month on the road, you're constantly running into people. And because I'm in places I don't know, I'm taking Ubers and Lyfts everywhere. I would guarantee half of my Uber and Lyft drivers were teachers. And we're not talking like Saturdays and Sundays. This is 9, 10 o'clock on school nights. So these teachers, at this point, you're supposed to be grading papers, thinking about tomorrow, preparing, not working the second job just to make ends meet. And then there was this one brother in Alabama, I'll never forget it. He was studying to become a principal. He had to quit teaching because he couldn't afford to pay his tuition to get his master's degree. He was driving Uber full time so that he could pay to become a principal. Something's really wrong with this system here. If we have folks that actually have to quit the system they're in to get a promotion in the system they want to be in. And so we really need to re-examine what are we doing as a country if teachers, who are our most prized possessions, who raise the next generation, have to quit or take on another job just to make their ends meet. And it's really frustrating because ultimately when I think about this issue, I think about the children. Everything education to me comes back to the children. And so when I think about this bill, because, it's DC, how are we going to pay for this? How are we going to do this? How can we afford not to pay for this? To me, this is an issue of national security. Who's going to teach the future generation to raise the system, to work the infrastructure to protect this country if we don't have teachers? And so this is a major, major deal to me, a major, major deal to everyone. And so the question shouldn't be, can we afford this? It's can we not afford this? We are hitting a point of a national emergency. And the number one reason people don't go into education is strictly the money. We were sitting down, my superintendent and I, we were having a discussion last week. He was like, I need 25 new math teachers. I need 25 new math teachers. Where are 25 new math teachers? Why can't we get 25 new math teachers? I was like, because math teachers understand numbers. And taking on $200,000 of student debt for a job that pays $40,000 is not good math. As they say, the math ain't mathing, And so we really need to start having these conversations about what are we doing to supplement, to give our teachers a living wage. And I'm so thankful that Congresswoman Wilson is actually bringing this to the forefront because this is an issue of national emergency. And more importantly, when I think about this bill, I think about teachers of color. As National Teacher of the Year, that was my platform, more teachers of color in the classroom. You all know the numbers. But the reality is when I go out and I try to recruit teachers of color, they simply can't afford it. A lot of them are first-generation college students. A lot of them are taking care of not only the issues in their classroom, but their issues at home. And so they have extra student debt. And so going to take a job for $40,000 just simply doesn't work. So if we truly want to live up to the American dream and make it accessible to all children, we have to start with a world-class education. And we need to pay teachers, because teachers are the gatekeepers to that solid education.
We had a change again, of course, of whether I was introducing everybody or whether they were introducing themselves. So here we are. Nicholas Ferroni is a member of the Teacher Salary Project Board of Directors. He is one of the country's most recognized and influential educators, following 120,000 followers. He has been a history and cultural study teacher for over 20 years in New Jersey's Union High, where he attended school himself. Please welcome Nicholas.
Hello. First, I can't stress this enough. I just want to thank the Teacher Salary Project team. This group is one of the most inspiring groups I've ever had the pleasure of working with. I want to thank Dr. Moss and Representative Wilson's team for bringing us here. I think this is proof that if you ever want to get anything done, you hire teachers or moms to get stuff done. It's the most powerful groups. I also want to state that I am a little guilty sitting here today because I did take a personal day. And for any teacher who knows, you worry about two things. Taking a personal day, my first thought is, do my colleagues have to cover my class because we don't have enough subs? And the second thought is, please be nice to the substitute if we have one. Please be nice to the sub. So I do have a question for the audience. I would like you to raise your hand if you ever had a teacher or teachers who impacted your life so much that they will forever hold a place in your hearts. Perfect. Me too. I was blessed to have amazing teachers, from Mrs. Martino, my kindergarten teacher, to Mr. Wazizak, Mr. Monaco, Mr. Calaguire. I am who I am because of my teachers. They cared about me, they inspired me, they nurtured me when I needed them most, and I had a very strong family unit. Like, your mom has to love you. You know, you need that extra affirmation from your teachers. And I think this is easy to say, it's been said over. Teachers are so much more than just teachers. So much more. I wish I knew that before I became a teacher. But I became a teacher because of these amazing individuals. As Nineveh said, I teach at the high school I went to. I'm in my 20th year. I was 4 years as a student, 20 years as a teacher. I spent more than half my life in Union High School, which is so exciting and so depressing at the same exact time. To the point my mom sends care packages to school. That's where she knows to find me. And it wasn't until I became a teacher that I realized what teachers actually do. I never realized that the stuff Mrs. Martino brought into kindergarten class or first grade, she bought. I didn't realize when I saw my coaches and teachers painting houses, working construction, waiting tables during the summer, that they were doing because they couldn't afford to survive. And I want to be clear, if you want to work an extra job as a teacher, that is fine. But it should not be forced upon you to do it in order to survive. How can we call teaching a career when you have to work other careers to continue being a teacher? And I think that's the one question we all come to. I didn't experience sexism until I became a teacher. 70% of all teachers are women. I will promise you this, if 70% of teachers were men, it would be $1 million six-figure-a-year job. And it just reinforced the fact that, unfortunately, I've become a teacher to realize that we don't have value work with women. And, like most teachers, this was my dream job. I wanted to be a teacher. Because of my amazing teachers, I'll be honest, Indiana Jones made me think history was the coolest thing in the entire world, so I played a part. But this is the first time, last year was the first time in my entire teaching career that I had to update my resume because I didn't think I could financially or emotionally endure it much more. And what does it say that people are leaving their dream job because it's become so unbearable? And when I say unbearable, it's not the kids. The kids is the only reason that most of us stay in the classroom. It's the society's expectations that have been placed on teachers without the resources and support. And I do want to say this. Whenever a teacher says leaving teaching is the toughest thing they've ever had to do, it is. It's not leaving a job. It's not quitting. It's letting down our family and our communities and our students. It is by far, me updating my resume, I was choking up because my first thought is, how am I going to talk to my students? Am I letting down my town? And so many teachers are going through this, which is why, teaching is one of the few professions where you have the largest impact on the largest number of youth. And I don't think people realize that. We impact the largest number of youth, which is why nobody, no politician, no person could say they support children and not support the people who spend the most time with the largest number of them. And a few things I'm going to finish up on. I will be quizzing everybody on this too, so get ready. It should anger people, and that's one thing I want people to realize. To collaborate with what Rodney said, I can't count the number of times I had Grubhub or my Uber driver was a teacher. I can count the number of times I've been to Walmart and seeing somebody look familiar and them saying, you know, well, I'm teaching, I'm coming here to my second job. That should infuriate people. It should anger people. Parents, if I was a parent and I saw my child's teacher working an extra job or begging for supplies online, which is happening right now, it becomes societally acceptable for teachers to be online begging. If the millions of teachers who are online begging stood in front of their board and actually did something and showed a sign, it would not be acceptable. So I'm here for all the amazing teachers. I'm here because I'm not the best teacher in my school or on this panel. And I'm just here because I don't want to marry rich, become an administrator, or switch jobs. I do want to stay in the classroom. So thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. 2 million teachers and educators choose. We have tax breaks for paying for our own supplies. Hopefully this is well known to everybody here. Dr. Felton Moss is a senior lecturer of education policy and leadership at American University, whose research focuses on building capacity to diversify the education workforce. He's a former English teacher himself. The rest of us are social studies teachers, so he's the outlier English teacher, and he was the youngest principal in the history of Mississippi at age 24. He's also the senior legislative assistant to the Honorable and Wonderful Warrior Wilson. He changed our lives the day that he called us. Dr. Moss, thank you for giving Ellen a call and inviting us on this journey. We are so grateful to you. Dr. Moss.
Yeah, so just want to give a huge thanks to the Teacher Salary Project for all of their work in helping us get to this place and all these great panelists. When Congresswoman Wilson and I were having a conversation one day about teacher salaries, I wasn't quite sure how we were going to do this. For those of us who study education policy, we know that the federal role in education is very limited. And so when you talk about supporting states in this way, you literally have either carrots or sticks. And you get carrots that you can feed and incentivize folks to be able to do what you want them to do, or you get sticks and you beat them over the head. We certainly weren't in a place where we wanted to do any of that. We've had enough of that in our tumultuous journey as educators of being beat over the head. And so the Congresswoman, we worked to put together a framework that would build a block grant program, that would build a grant program to be able to support states on their journey towards increasing teacher salaries. What we understood is that an entitlement program would be very difficult to move through, and it would be a long-standing commitment for our country. And so what we did was we built a 4-year program where the federal government over time would decrease its responsibility in supporting states towards a minimum of $60,000. That was the first step in our journey. What we soon realized as part of this conversation is that there were states and municipalities that had already made a strong effort toward a $60,000 salary. In many cases, they had gone above and beyond that, and we were excited about it. But yet, when we thought about the cost of living in those places, we knew teachers still needed some work. So in the first iteration of this bill that was filed in December, you only saw one grant program. In the version that will be filed in coming days, you'll see an additional grant program that states can actually apply for dollars to be able to provide teachers with a cost of living adjustment. There are a couple of things inside of this that I want to make sure is clear. There's a maintenance of effort provision. We understand that in states that are not always kind and loving to us, that states often draw back on their responsibility. And so there's explicit language in the bill that requires a state not to draw back on their original commitment as they move in this way. What you also did not see in the original bill was language that would support teachers who have been part of collective bargaining agreements so that states or districts or locales would not pull back on those agreements in an effort to raise teacher salaries. There's also a provision inside of the bill that addresses this notion of part-time work. One of the things I've been overwhelmingly interested in is folks who just want to teach part-time. They've been able to fill some of those roles. And so what this bill does is it really bills a proportional salary to a teacher's workload, so that it still sits at the $60K as the base, but it's proportioned out based on a teacher's workload. We also didn't forget about assistant teachers as part of this work. There's work there. When you think about what we're asking states to do in this bill, that we're asking them to literally go back in law and change their salary schedules that have been etched in law. And so when you change your base, every teacher benefits from that. And so we're going to be asking a state to completely adjust its entire salary schedule, which is a lot. And so we're excited about it. We looked at this. This bill is what we call authorizing language here. And so then we'll move back into what we call appropriating language. And what's so exciting about that for us is the ranking member on the Democratic side came on the bill early on. So there's broad support on the appropriation side in this endeavor. The final piece of this work, of this bill, is one that I'm most excited about. I'm excited about the salaries, but I think we've got to really rebrand this profession. When I worked at the Department of Education in Mississippi, I continue to hear stories about folks who didn't want to enter the profession. And so we've got to tell a different story about teaching in this country. I remember when my grandmother, who was a teacher for 47 years, was teaching, it was the prized thing to do. It was the respectful thing to do. And so there's funding set aside in this bill for the U.S. Department of Education to actually launch a national teacher campaign to be able to, expand awareness around the teaching profession. But bottom line, this bill does three things. It establishes a grant program to get teachers to $60K in places where they're already $60K. We need to give a cost of living adjustment. The final piece is around an awareness campaign. What I do want to say in my closing remarks here, we were going to refile the bill today, but we have some language here that we really want to tighten up to be able to support states in an authentic way. And so we will be refiling the bill. So for LAs who are in the room that have emailed me about being original co-sponsors, you will still have an opportunity to do that between now and Friday. So just wanted to say that to those folks in the room, but we'll take questions a little bit later.
Thank you, Dr. Moss. I also want to acknowledge, I don't know where Bob Willoughby is. Bob Willoughby is right here. He is on our board. He's also the person that got the baseline salaries in New Jersey, first up to 40, then 50, then 60. So he created the model in New Jersey that we're basing this off. So people from the Teacher Salary Project, not me, but Bob, have done this before, and we just want to do it nationally. So it's an enormous act of love. I have the great pleasure of introducing our final panelist. Secretary Arne Duncan was the U.S. Secretary of Education under President Obama. He was also the Chief Executive Officer for the Chicago Public Schools. He is currently a Senior Fellow at the University of Chicago's Harris School of Public Policy. He's the founder of CRED, which is a nonprofit committed to radically reducing gun violence, really helping us elevate today. We appreciate you coming, making time for us, and we're really excited to hear what you have to say.
I have to admit, I didn't always love coming over here to testify before Congress, but I'm thrilled to be here today. I'm clearly I'm a little out of date. My dress code is not to par, so I put a tie on in a couple of years, but I'm really, really happy to be here. Thanks all of you for being here. I want to just make a couple quick points and then sort of address head-on two of the potential critiques of this really important legislation. So first, what's the impact of a great teacher? We can talk about test scores, we can talk about graduation rates, we can talk about all that. But Raj Chetty worked at Stanford, worked at Harvard, looked at millions of student records out of New York City. And one good middle school teacher raised lifetime earnings of that class by $250,000. So when you think about putting two good teachers back to back, or three good teachers back to back, what does that do for young people in perpetuity? Secondly, I've always been attracted to education. Grew up in my mother's after-school tutoring program. Looked like your grandmother. She worked for 52 years. Unfortunately, her health gave out in the inner city of Chicago. And all of our students were poor. 85% of the students in Chicago public schools where I work live below the poverty line. No child is at fault because they're poor. No one grows up wanting to be poor. Why are kids poor in America? Often because their parents are undereducated. They haven't had those opportunities. I would tell my team all the time in Chicago is if a generation from now, 85% of students are still poor, then we would have failed. That the only way I know how to break cycles of poverty, create mobility, is to create educational opportunity. And I've seen all my life kids from the poorest communities, the toughest home environments, where they have great educators, great after school programs, great education opportunities. They can go on to do extraordinary things. But we don't have those things. We perpetuate those cycles of poverty and social failure. So getting great teachers where we need them most is critically important. Third, we know we live in a flat world now. And we want to keep high-skill, high-wage jobs in our communities and our country. But those jobs are going to go where the best educated workforce is. So I want that to be the United States, but that could be China, that can be Singapore, that can be Japan, that can be South Korea, that can be anywhere. We need to fight to keep those jobs, those knowledge worker jobs, in our country. The only way to do that is to have the best educated workforce in the world. Fourth, this point's been made, I just want to really emphasize it, that I think we all desperately want and need our teacher workforce to reflect the great diversity of our nation's public school students. But it does not reflect that diversity. We are too white, frankly, and too female. And if we want to attract more men, which we've talked about, more men of color, which we've talked about, the point of so many folks of color who are first-generation college goers, who are taking out very, very significant loans, their heart may absolutely be in teaching and going back to their high schools and communities like we've done, but they simply can't afford to do that. They don't have the privilege of doing that, and they have to take another career path because they can't afford the loans and they have to look out for other family members. If we can raise salaries, we take away that financial barrier and we allow people to pursue their heart and their passion. I think what those mentors and role models mean for so many of our kids across the country. Last point, and I'll address the two questions, is the world's changed a lot in the 6 years since I've been in TC. And things that I just thought were rock solid growing up, very specifically our democracy, it's been just a devastating lesson in how fragile our democracy is and how we're fighting every day to keep it. And that fight is present, is current, is very, very real. And I don't say this easily or lightly. I've never been more scared in my life for our democracy to survive. I know democracies thrive when you have a well-educated citizenry and involved citizenry. I know when you have less well-educated folks, the chance for an authoritarian leader to emerge is much more attractive, is a much more rational choice for those. And so whether it's fighting to end cycles of poverty, whether it's fighting to keep good jobs in our country, whether it's fighting literally to save our country, I can't think of a better way to do that than to attract and retain great teachers. And salary is an important piece. No one goes into education to make $1 million, but you shouldn't have to take a vow of poverty either. You guys have heard story after story where that's just simply not fair. Removing those barriers, I think, will attract the kinds of folks who want to make a huge difference in young people's lives. There's no better, there's no more important place to do that than the classroom. Two potential critiques, I just want to address them head on. What is the potential cost? And you guys may have hard numbers. My rough numbers, this is probably north of $50 billion a year. It's real money. Having said that, in education, everything in government, there are costs, there are expenses, and there are investments. And I would urge everyone to look at this as an investment. The cost, the expense of dropouts each year in this country is over $200 billion every single year in lost wages and lost taxes. And we all know what changes kids' lives is relationships. Where they have great teachers and great social workers and great mentors, they're not going to jump out of school. When they fall through the cracks, that's where we lose them. So if we can invest that money. I spend way more time than I would like today in Cook County Jail and other places. 80% of those incarcerated, and 78% of those incarcerated across the country right now don't have high school diplomas. What's that cost? So we look at the cost of dropouts, we look at the cost of incarceration, forget all the hearts and feel-good stuff. I can make a very good return on investment case that investing in teachers, bringing up those base salaries, attracting that great talent, will dramatically reduce the cost of dropouts and dramatically reduce the cost of incarceration. The final one, which was mentioned earlier, is education is K-12 is often a very local issue here in the United States. And the first critique will be, well, this is federal overreach. And let me just try and challenge that assumption. Education to me is the ultimate bipartisan issue. There's nothing Republican and Democrat about more kids having access to pre-K, more graduates, less dropouts, more kids going into college and going to the world workforce. This is not left or right or RD. This is nation building. We're trying to build our nation here. And I used to say all the time that a great military is our best defense, but a great education system is our best offense. And our country's in a very, very difficult, I would say fragile, precarious place. And moments like this require a national response. When we had to fight World War II or fight something, we didn't send 50 state militias or 100,000 little local school districts. We sent the best, the Army, the Navy, the Marines. We need to look at our teacher workforce across the country as the best offense for our nation. And this bill, this legislation, will start to signal to everybody that this is a national priority that our nation desperately needs and desperately deserves today.
So we have 14 precious minutes left, so we have time for some questions. We're really looking forward to hearing what's on your mind. I want to tell you that as an educator, I've never been motivated by money one day in my life, but us educators, we do make financially based decisions. So if you put two districts side by side, and in one district the starting salary is higher, I will go to that starting district. I will go to where you're going to pay me more. It doesn't mean I'm motivated by money, but I am trying to pay my own bills. So teachers, we're a funny beast. We're certainly not motivated by money, but this is really a disgrace where we are now. Does anybody have any questions? I think the press knows this is not a press conference, so we can't take questions. Oh no, the two women, are both of you journalists?
No.
Terrific. So I think the press knows this, but it's my job to just say it's not a press conference, so if press wants to get in touch with us, we are open and ready for you. We just can't take your questions right now. So for everyone else who's not a journalist, we welcome. Can we start in the back and we'll come back to you? Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for this briefing. My name is Cameron Blackmore, and I am a health policy advisor in Congresswoman Sewell's office. But I had a question related to this bill. Does it take into account those areas where the property taxes aren't as high? Is there like a formula of some sort that would account and provide more support to those districts where the property taxes are lower and the per pupil costs are lower as well?
Yeah. Really phenomenal question. There's a trigger inside of the bill, if you would, that takes into account Title I. So in the event, because this is discretionary spending and you may not be able to get all the funding that you need in the first round, the agency might get enough for a pilot. What language we put in as a safety net is that SEA, state education agencies, would prioritize schools that have been labeled Title I. And so we use our federal formula for Title I to be able to give priority to those. So our large intent is that this bill would be fully funded. But in the event that it does not receive full funding, we have a trigger in there that state education agencies would start with individual schools that are Title I, schools and districts that are Title I. Hope that helps.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So I'm Michelle Strand. I am an Einstein Fellow working on education issues in the Office of Congressman DeSaulnier. I have been a teacher for 30 years. And one of the, I know you mentioned that this bill has, that as the whole salary schedule gets adjusted, it would help the teachers. But one of the big issues for veteran teachers who are now leaving in droves is the fact that you get beyond maybe 20 years and you don't see as big of increases, and usually those are eaten up by increasing healthcare costs. Is there anything in your bill that accounts for that?
Yeah, so right off the answer is no. I think there are opportunities for that. I think an unintended, well maybe an intended but unintended consequence is that in those states that are already at $60K that apply for a cost of living adjustment, I think they would benefit from that provision. But I don't think there's a particular set of language in the bill that particularly drive towards the outcome that you want. The answer would be no. Are there opportunities to do that? I think so. I think there's some opportunity to drive in that way. There's a lot of opportunity around this to strengthen the quality of the bill, and I think we are open to having additional conversation around what that might look like. But as the bill presently stands, veteran teachers would primarily benefit from the cost of living adjustments if states approach it in that way.
Go ahead.
Me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Heather Olsenbeal. I'm a legislative fellow in Congressman Dalton's office. But in my real life, when I'm not here, I'm a professor of education. I'm a teacher education in Texas. Texas historically has not agreed to compensate teachers fairly. So I wonder what I think that some people with whom I don't agree would come back to this proposal and say, we are basically letting the Texas state legislature off the hook. We don't have income tax in Texas, and that's like a big matter of pride, like, we're free in Texas and all this stuff, right? We're free to have people fully compensated. But how would you counter that? Am I making myself clear? We talked about it a little bit in the elevator, because I feel like the state legislatures, if I were in a state that compensated teachers appropriately, I would be like, hey, we shouldn't have to bail out Texas. They need to raise their taxes. The legislature needs to support them, right? Why should we have to?
I have thoughts, but Ellen, do you want to go first, followed by Secretary Duncan? Great.
Yeah, so I think it's hard to say which states would benefit the most. First, I don't think that there's any state that really is paying their teachers enough currently. But on the one hand, like you say, the states that are paying teachers the least would receive the greatest amount of funds from the federal government to make up that difference during the 4 years of this grant, if they apply for the grant, which means that they're committing to sustaining these much, much higher salaries than what they're paying right now. On the flip side, the states that are already paying minimum teacher salaries closer to $50,000, yes, it's less federal money that they would get to get them up to 60, but it's also an easier lift for them to take advantage of the grant.
Did you want to add anything? You thought about the Texas argument?
Yeah, no, just really quickly, it's a really important question. And I just personally, we could be dead wrong, I just totally agree with the theory of change here, this idea of carrots rather than sticks. And when you incentivize folks, and we had a lot of experience providing incentives when I was here, I was actually stunned at how many people jumped at those incentives. And Republican governors who I might disagree with, 90% of what happens. And I can't speak to your specific governor. There are huge, huge challenges there. But it puts a lot of pressure. It puts a lot of pressure on a governor if 30 or 40 other states are doing this, and it gives leverage to citizens saying, if other states are doing this, what will happen? I'll just give you one anecdote. You can't do policy in anecdote, but the governor of Mississippi, Governor Bryant, who he and I disagreed on almost everything, he was heartbroken that we couldn't get them more early childhood money. And I was heartbroken as well. And we couldn't get his congressional leadership from the state of Mississippi to back what he wanted. So there was a disconnect there. But when you have real people dealing with real communities, real teachers, real parents, this issue touches everybody in every state. Everyone has a kid, send someone to school, no one gets a pass on this. I think the way they're structuring it doesn't guarantee success, but it gives it a huge chance to have way more states participate than they might at first meet the eye.
And I want to say we learned a lot from Medicaid expansion, right? If you look at what's happened with Medicaid expansion and the way the opt-out provisions and opt-in provisions that we put in different laws, but some of our work here in crafting this bill was to think about some of the lessons learned and some of the failures of Medicaid on the opt-out provisions.
Right, Texas didn't do that.
Curtis first, and then the gentleman in the back. Who was somebody? Oh, Rodney, Curtis, gentleman in the back. 1, 2, 3.
I wanted to add a little bit more to that, just talking to teachers. And if Texas doesn't participate, and Oklahoma, Arkansas, all the states that border do, what you're going to see is a mass exodus of teachers from Texas to those other states. And so it's going to really put more pressure on Texas to say, hey, we're going to make this commitment to teachers, because if we don't, they're leaving. A lot of teachers in Texas now are those that left Oklahoma and went to Texas. And so they're going to go back home. Other teachers are going to go where they're getting paid. And so not only will pressure come from the other governors, but as teachers, we can put that pressure on by making the decision to, well, you're not going to pay me. I'll just drive 20 miles further to the next state that will give me that money.
Rodney, I'm so glad you said that. About 10 years ago, we did something called the Governor's Challenge, and we convinced the governor of West Virginia to raise his salaries because we were showing evidence that he was subsidizing for teacher training, and they were leaving for neighboring states for very, very, not a ton of money, but they were walking. So Rodney, your point is well taken, so we could celebrate that success. We got West Virginia raised, And recently, thanks to West End and work that Ellen worked on, we also got Delaware teachers a 9% raise. Curtis, to you.
Good afternoon, Curtis Valentine with Real Men Teach. Talk a little bit more how this disproportionately affects male educators. Many educators who we speak to talk about either leaving the profession to start a family, and the impact of them being able to live in the communities and afford to live in the communities in which they teach, which is also a best practice. But also, as we're talking to young people, particularly middle school, high school students who are trying to recruit into the profession, how we talk about professionalizing. In the previous life, I worked in the Office of National Development, working with the Education Department, looking at the world. Places like Finland are really putting their money behind this idea of professionalizing teaching, and they sort of balk at America saying it, but not really having those salaries compete with doctors and lawyers. And so, talk a little about this impact, particularly on the educators, but also how this really is just to actually professionalize the profession, not just giving lip service to it.
Thank you. He reminds me that had teacher salaries kept pace with per pupil spending, average salaries would be between $120,000 and $140,000. So something that we have to contend with is that we're the industrialized country that spends the most on education, and teacher salaries used to constitute 60% of school budgets. They're now less than a third. So part of what states are going to have to do is go back and look at the resources that are there. Sir in the back with the suit, yes.
Yes, my name is Anthony Sam. I'm the 2021 Virginia Teacher of the Year.
Thank you for being here.
My question is kind of twofold. After the grant, then what? And can our salaries be sustainable even after the grant?
Dr. Moss?
Yeah, so I think then what, the question of then what is the maintenance of effort provision that's inside of the bill requires that. What we're also doing here is asking state legislatures to go in state law and change their salary schedules. And so there would take another change on the legislative side to go back and reduce their contribution. And so I don't know that teachers will allow that to happen. It may happen in some states, but we put some guardrails inside of the bill to preclude that from happening. I think there's a world in which a state could say we want to reduce teacher salaries. I think that's wildly unpopular for that to happen. But we have put guardrails. The maintenance of effort provision being the first one, but the biggest one of all is you're actually changing this in state law. Salary schedules in most states. I've not been able to find states where it's not etched in state law, but the majority of states is etched in state law, so there would require a policy change.
I think I saw one more hand. Thank you, Dr. Moss. Yes, sir.
I'll make sure it's me. My name is Brian Darty. Taught in West Virginia for 16 years. Now I'm teaching here in D.C. My question is, in states where there's a shortage, like West Virginia, and thank you for the work for the pay raise, by the way. What I'm concerned about is in states where the shortages are so bad, they're downgrading qualification to become a teacher. Anybody can get a college degree, and in some cases they don't even need a college degree. And so my concern is giving $60,000 to anybody who will teach, basically, and the problem that might create. So again, I don't want to not support the bill because I will, but that's an issue that I'm really concerned about.
That's a great question. There are 160,000 underqualified people in classrooms today. Who wants to address that question? We try to anticipate all the tough ones. But let
me address your concern here. If you get into the details of the bill, and there's actually this is part of the language that we're going back and forth on right now, just to be fully transparent with you, is look at the definition of a teacher. And it speaks to the credentialing of that to preclude that from happening. What I also want to caution mindsets around this notion is that oftentimes what has precluded individuals from entering into the teaching profession are assessments and stringent licensure guidelines that have been put in place by states that they never remove from NCOB days in the transition to ESSA. And so we've got to walk a fine line with this and not make a lot of assumptions about why people are not credentialed, and think about the system that has created these credentialing challenges that we do have. And so this is a fine line that we're certainly walking. We do believe in a bar. That folks need to be credentialed, but we have to understand the system by which our credentialing process has been made that often disenfranchises educators of color. So when you talk about diversifying the educator pipeline, you've got to also talk about onboarding. What does entry into the profession look like? And licensure guidelines are there. And so that is a real tension for us here that we've not quite settled on. There are some hard lines over here. What is the definition of a teacher? There's questions around, should that be left up to the states? Or should we define that federally? If you look at ESSA, NCLB, there is a definition, but it's not as narrow as many folks would want it to be. I hope that answered your question, but that is a tension point that we've been trying to settle.
I also want to, just going back to professionalism, has there ever been a situation where we've lowered this quality or needed to get a position and it actually benefit in the long run? I don't need a 10-year study now to say how it's going to affect generations of students. Imagine you get on your plane today and you find that the pilot was a speedy program, or your surgeon just got through and the qualifications weren't the same. But it goes back to the fact that we have a society that doesn't value education and thinks anybody with a degree can do it. And I will say this, I went to school for education. It wasn't until my 5th or 6th year that I actually knew what I was doing and how important it was. I don't remember my first few years. I remember wanting to quit every single week because it's so intense. But we don't need a long-term study to think that people don't value the profession. I think that's what we need to get to and we need to change.
It's my job now to sadly thank you all for being here. Please talk to your Republican friends. We're nonpartisan. We want to bring everybody together. We are celebrating Dr. Moss's team and the Teacher Salary Project and Dave Eggers. We're all going to be celebrating at 6 p.m. at Sonoma. You are all invited to continue that conversation. We want the Teacher Salary Project to be obsolete, so let's do it. Thank you to our beautiful panel. Thank you to everybody.